In 2022, a rebuilt Monarch 10EE left Sidney, Ohio, for service aboard a United States Navy aircraft carrier. The machine came from a design first completed in 1938. A rebuilt example could command more than $100,000, and it was still useful in a place where a loose shaft, a damaged fitting or a part, made a few thousandths off, could stop work far from shore. For a machinist, a lathe is not decoration. It holds metal turns, it cuts it, and makes other machines possible. Monarch once built that kind of trust at factory scale. In 1942, its Sidney plant produced 8,116 lathes and employed about 2,700 workers. But decades later, buyers wanted more than cast iron and accuracy. They wanted standardized controls, predictable uptime, faster delivery, and service economics that fit the new CNC shop. The old machine could accept new electronics. The company around it had a harder problem. On December 21st, in 1938, the first Monarch 10E was completed in Sidney, Ohio. Its serial number was E6156. Engineering work had begun only 6 months earlier at a time when a machine tool company did not spend money casually. Monarch put nearly $100,000 into the development of that lathe. For a company still carrying the memory of Depression-era order books, that was not a small bet. It was money placed into cast iron drive systems, bearings, dials, and the belief that a tool room lathe could command a premium if it held metal more steadily than the machine beside it. The result did not look like a modest 10-inch lathe. The 10E weighed about 3,250 pounds. Its footprint was only about 29 inches by 60 inches, but the machine could actually swing a 12-inch workpiece over the bed. Much of that weight was there for one reason: vibration. When a cutting tool meets metal, the work does not forgive movement. A few thousandths of an inch can separate a usable part from a rejected one. Inside the machine, Monarch also changed the way an operator worked. The early 10E used a Sunstrand hydraulic variable speed drive. Instead of stopping to change belts or gears, the operator could dial spindle speed across a range from 25 to 2,500 revolutions per minute. Speed became something the machinist could adjust while staying close to the cut. That mattered because Monarch was not selling a light shop accessory. It was selling time on a machine that had to justify its floor space. Wendell Whipp understood that pressure before the 10E existed. During the Depression, when manufacturers stopped buying new capital equipment, Monarch's order books thinned out. The safer move would have been to cut engineering staff and wait. Whipp cut his own salary instead and kept engineers working on the next machines. The floor did not have enough orders. The drafting room still had work. That choice gave Monarch a product ready for the moment. When precision stopped being a specialty demand and became a national requirement. By 1942, the Sidney plant had been stretched far beyond the shop that produced the first Monarch lathes. The factory expanded from about 133,000 square feet to nearly 200,000. More workers came through the gates. More cranes moved over the floor. More finished machines had to leave on schedule because the country was no longer buying machine tools for ordinary expansion. It was buying them for war. That year, Monarch produced 8,116 lathes, the largest annual output in the company's history. The workforce reached about 2,700 people. A machine tool builder in a small Ohio town had become part of the industrial layer beneath ships' aircraft guns, engines, and military production lines. Before those things could be built in volume, factories needed machines that could cut shafts, housings, fixtures, dies, and replacement parts with repeatable accuracy. The pressure reached the labor force quickly. Within 6 months of hiring its first female employee, Virginia Oldham Monarch had more than 500 women working on the floor. They were not placed only at the edges of production. They operated overhead cranes. They assembled headstocks. They scraped cast iron ways by hand, a task where a surface too high or too low could change the way a carriage moved along the bed. The old shop culture resisted it. Machine tool work had been male work for as long as many workers could remember. The building did not even have the facilities ready for a different workforce. But war production did not wait for the old arrangement to feel comfortable. The floor needed hands that could hold the standard, and the work itself became the test. Monarch received the Army-Navy E Award 6 times during the war. That honor did not make the lathes better. It showed that the federal government could measure what the Sidney plant was delivering: output, reliability, and production discipline at a moment when delay had consequences beyond the factory gate. The 10E also kept changing inside its own body. The first machines used a hydraulic variable speed drive. In 1941, Monarch moved to a Reliance motor generator set. Later came the YA drive with vacuum tubes mounted on panels that slid out beneath the tailstock. After that came solid-state electronics and eventually an AC inverter drive. The housing stayed recognizable. The control technology did not. That was the unusual strength of the machine. Its cast iron body could absorb new generations of electronics without losing the physical form machinists trusted. For decades, Monarch could update the drive and keep the same basic object at the center of the shop. But that strength also planted the harder question. If the machine could keep accepting new technology, could the company around it keep changing the way customers would soon demand? In 1955, Monarch brought a modified Model 1000E to the National Machine Tool Builders Association show in Chicago. On the surface, it was another trade show demonstration. A machine on a stand, men in suits, engineers explaining controls to buyers who had seen years of mechanical improvement. But this machine pointed to a different kind of factory. The modified 1000E used a hybrid tracer numerical control system. It showed that a lathe could begin moving beyond the direct hand of the operator. A machinist still mattered. Setup still mattered. Cutting metal still required mass rigidity and judgment. But instructions were beginning to move into controls, tape circuits, and repeatable programs. That same year, Monarch showed the Series 62 with the DynaShift headstock. A machinist could set the desired surface speed and workpiece diameter on 2 dials. Inside the headstock, a mechanical computer selected from 36 speeds and shifted hydraulically. It was still a heavy machine. It still belonged to the world of gears, oil castings, and hand wheels. But the direction was visible. The operator was no longer only fighting the cut. He was beginning to manage a machine that could make more decisions for him. Through the 1960s and early 1970s, Monarch expanded around that belief. It acquired machinery, companies added divisions, moved into machining centers and coil processing equipment, and bought a British foundry that could supply castings. The company was no longer only a dedicated lathe builder in Sydney. It had become a wider manufacturing organization with more plants, more products, and more management layers. By the mid-1970s, the Sydney site covered about 440,000 square feet on 13 acres. More than 125 cranes worked inside the operation. A parking lot for 720 cars connected to the main building by a pedestrian bridge over the Baltimore and Ohio rail line. Those numbers looked like strength. They also meant fixed cost coordination payroll and a factory base that needed enough orders to stay fed. In 1975, a long strike shut down the Sydney plant and ran into the following year. Some of the younger skilled workers left and did not return. The damage was not only the work that stopped during the strike. It was the knowledge that walked out after it. Monarch had seen the direction of numerical control early. The harder problem was keeping the people capital and decision structure aligned long enough to own that direction. By the late 1970s and through the 1980s, the purchase order for a machine tool began to measure different things. A shop owner still cared about accuracy. A plant manager still cared about rigidity. But the buyer also had to count delivery time, service support, operator training control, reliability, and how long a machine would sit idle when something failed. That was where the new competition became difficult for Monarch. Japanese builders such as Yamazaki, Mazak Moriseiki, and Okuma were not simply selling cheaper machines into the American market. Their stronger advantage came from a tighter package, standardized machine designs, reliable CNC controls, and deep integration with Fanuc electronics. A customer could buy a machine with controls that technicians understood, parts that could be supported more predictably, and delivery that could happen in weeks rather than after a long custom build. For a factory with orders waiting, that mattered. A machine that arrived sooner could start paying for itself sooner. A machine with familiar controls could train operators faster. A machine with predictable uptime could be easier to finance, easier to schedule, and easier to explain to the person responsible for the floor. Monarch still knew how to build heavy iron, but heavy iron was no longer the whole purchase. The company and other American builders pushed for protection. In 1986, the Reagan administration announced voluntary restraint agreements with Japan and Taiwan, limiting certain machine tool imports for 5 years. The agreement may have opened room for additional domestic sales, but Reagan added a line that narrowed the comfort such protection could give. The revitalization of the domestic machine tool industry, he said, was primarily the industry's own responsibility. That responsibility came back to Sidney in a very specific form. At the 1990 International Manufacturing Technology Show, Monarch introduced the Ultra Center. It had opposing spindles' 4-axis capability and a patented 15-second turret changer. The price was around $500,000, buyers noticed. Orders came in. On the trade show floor, the machine looked like proof that Monarch could still answer the CNC age with engineering force. But a trade show floor is not a customer's production schedule. The next test would not be whether the machine could impress the industry. It would be whether Monarch could build it, ship it, support it, and make money after the service calls began. The first Ultra Center did not reach a customer until April 1992. By then, the trade show excitement had already turned into a delivery problem. A machine that was supposed to prove Monarch still belonged in the CNC future now had to prove something more ordinary, that it could arrive, run, and keep running. Early units delivered only about 80% uptime. For a shop owner, that number did not live on a sales brochure. It lived in missed work, idle operator service calls, and production hours that could not be billed. The 15-second turret changer still mattered, but it could not erase the cost of a machine sitting still. Warranty claims soon exceeded profits. Monarch was spending more to correct the machines than it was making from the machines it had sold. At the same time, prices had been cut to win competitive bids. The company was taking orders that looked useful from the outside, while the actual cost underneath those orders was harder to see. In 1996, 2 executives found the number that made the problem plain. The Sidney division's break-even point was not $20 million in annual sales as people had assumed. It was $23 million. $3 million changed the meaning of the order book. A deal that looked like revenue could be a loss. A machine that looked like a comeback could become a service burden. A factory that had once measured its strength and output now had to measure the gap between what it charged and what it cost to deliver. In March 1997, turnaround executive Richard Clemens arrived. By July, he announced the sale of the Sidney lathe operations to Lucas Precision for $10 million. The sale closed on August 1, 1997. The Cortland Machining Center plant was sold separately in 2000. The parent company, renamed Genesis Worldwide, filed for Chapter 11 protection in 2001. The Sidney operation did not simply vanish, but Monarch had lost the larger structure around the machine, the capital, the pricing control, the product confidence, and the full industrial position that had once made the name carry weight. After the sale, 615 North Oak Avenue did not lose every trace of the work that had started there in 1909. Lucas Precision kept the Sidney operation open under Monarch Lathes. In 1999, Harry Camp, a longtime Monarch service technician, became president and pushed the business deeper into parts service and full remanufacturing of 10E lathes. That was a smaller kind of company than the one that had once produced thousands of machines in a year. But it kept the part of Monarch that still had work to do, the records, the parts knowledge, the repair habits, and the old castings customers still trusted. A rebuilt 10E from Sidney could reportedly command more than $100,000. In 2022, one was delivered for service aboard a United States Navy aircraft carrier. The machine had been conceived before the Second World War. Its body still carried the shape of that earlier age. Inside the drive could be modern. That is the remaining shape of Monarch's story. The large manufacturing company lost the market it once helped define. The product did not disappear with it. It narrowed into a different role. Service bench replacement drive rebuilt spindle old casting opened for one more update. Somewhere aboard a modern warship, that older shape still has a job. A motor comes up to speed. The spindle turns. Metal meets the tool again.